All right, well, we're here today with Al Myers, the founder and president of Ag Leader and a pioneer in precision agriculture technologies. Ag Leader launched the first on-you-go yield monitor back in 1992 and has introduced many innovative precision agriculture tools since that time, and today has almost 300 employees who make tools used by farmers from around the world. Al, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So tell us the founding story of Ag Leader.
Well, the founding story actually started in the early 1980s, even though I did not start the company until 1992. The company that I worked for, a division of a large company here in Ames, it's still here. It's gone through three ownership changes since then. They went through some bad management, and there were some very tough economic times for them in the 1980s because their business depended on, production of off-road machinery for both farm and construction and other specialty heavy machinery. And it was just a terrible time in the 1980s with the farm crisis, the very high, like 15% inflationary rate in the early 1980s. And so I became not so happy with my job there. And there was no other industry similar to that I could go get a job because all those companies were letting people go. The smaller companies that couldn't survive either went bankrupt, or many of them ceased operation or got acquired by larger companies. For example, International Harvester, who at one time was the largest ag machinery manufacturer up until John Deere exceeded them in the mid-1960s, I think. They actually sold off their farm machinery division to the company that then owned the Case farm and construction equipment. And so it was some really tough times. I didn't get to do some of the kind of things that I really like to do, develop new products. So in the early 80s, I began thinking, could I create a product to start my own company? And I could do what I want to do. And literally, I would off and on brainstorm some ideas and keep them in a little notebook. It was very intermittent because I had a young family back then. My two sons were born in 1979 and 1981, and so I knew I had to do, if I was going to do this, I'd have to do it in secrecy, or else I might be on the layoff lists because they had layoffs almost every year for 10 years during the 1980s. So I knew I had to do something not competitive to their business, which is what I eventually chose. And finally, by late 1985, I got to the point that I had decided I want to try to develop a yield monitor for grain combines. I just felt that was an idea that somebody would do someday. And the existing companies, whether large or medium-sized, they were not focusing on new technology development like that. So finally got to the point in late 1985, and I said, I'm going to try to do something. And so
How many ideas do you suppose were in your notebook that you kept at that point when you decided that the yield monitor was the product that you wanted to work on?
Oh, not a whole lot of ideas. I know there were some ideas that related somewhat to their industry, things that they didn't do that actually came to fruition about the time I started Ag Leader, but nobody had any intellectual property protection. So there were like 10 companies selling this thing that I thought, well, maybe I should do this kind of thing. I was glad I didn't go that direction.
Didn't need that much competition.
Right. And those products have actually pretty much faded out of the market since then due to the development of GPS steering of farm machinery. But anyway, finally decided I wanted to do something, so I bought, maybe it was a couple $1,000s of electronic equipment set up in my basement to do some bench testing of the way I thought I could possibly measure grain flow, which was purely electronic rather than the mechanical method that I ended up using. And only took me maybe 3 months to decide, I don't think I can do that with my limited knowledge of high frequency electronics, which should have been required, that kind of a thing. And so I got pretty dejected and basically stopped thinking about it for a while. And it was actually in 1986. It was actually over the July 4th of July holiday weekend. I got real motivated, and I said, okay, let me go back through my different ideas on how we can do this. And I came up with the idea that I pursued. And actually, I went to a combine and tractor scrapyard up by Iowa Falls and got a clean grain elevator off of an old John Deere combine, one that had an elevator very similar to my father's then John Deere combine, so that I could develop something that would fit in his. He knew what I wanted to do, and he'd agreed he'd be a field tester for me. I, revealed my thoughts to him in late 1985 before I actually did anything.
Family gets to be the first tester.
Yes, and it was also a way to keep it confidential because his farm was almost 400 miles from here, over in eastern Illinois, where I grew up on that farm. But anyway, I had an idea, and I made a real quick and dirty test rig, and actually manufactured a prototype load cell, and basically created a grain flow sensor where the grain flow at the top of the clean grain elevator would impact a sensor, and you'd measure the force. It was a pretty crude prototype, and my electronic device was made mostly with Radio Shack parts.
Okay.
A few other more sophisticated parts that I was able to figure out where I could mail order those. And I actually had a very crude prototype running on his combine that fall. So I created a prototype in, less than 3 months or something like that. So it was a real quick and dirty, but it basically said, yeah, this concept looks like it might work, but it's definitely not accurate enough. It's maybe 15% accuracy in measuring the grain accumulated in a combine, where it maybe needs to be, in the low single digit percents, under 5% or under that kind of a thing. So then I built a better test rig, and which I used, and I improved that over the years, but I basically used that for 5 more years, fooling around with different mechanical configurations of the sensor. And during that time, I taught myself how to do some microprocessor programming. Microprocessors were becoming available and cost-effective to, you might say, the average person. I knew I couldn't design a computer board. I used several different, what you'd call single board computers, and, linked it up to some analog circuitry that I was able to build myself. And basically, and certainly there were some significant problems to solve with the mechanical configuration and how you analyze the signal off of the grain flow sensor. But anyway, by 1991, I felt I was getting pretty close to something that was commercializable. And I will thank my first competitor that introduced to the market the same year in 1992 for getting magazine coverage to spur me to say, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to do this now.
Better get going.
Better get going. And in the end, several years later, my product eventually won out after those, because I could see that their product was half-baked compared to the 6 years that I'd spent developing my product. So that's the history of how I started the product. In June 1992, I resigned my job, and 2 weeks later, basically, I'm Ag Leader Technology Company, just me.
You've got a new business card.
Yep, I think my first business card, I just called myself owner. I was owner and everything else.
You get to give yourself your own title.
Yeah, so the first year I operated out of my home. And I ordered parts, like metal parts. I couldn't manufacture them, but I managed to hook up with a company actually in Denver, Colorado, just looking through. There used to be these big books that purchasing agents used. And I went to the ISU library where I found some of those. That's back in the days when anybody could walk in the library and go look for stuff. And found a company where when I called up, the guy listened to me when I said I want to buy 50 it was custom metal parts made, several different pieces. So I got some parts made. I actually designed and don't remember where I got them made. Some analog circuit boards to interface to the single board computer. And I wanted to build 50. I did order enough parts to build 50 units. I was hoping to sell 30 or 40. Mm-hmm. And I only sold 10 that year. And I was intending, of course, my dad actually bought two because he was, back in those days, he was running a second combine to help out in soybean harvest. And a couple of his neighbors ended up buying one. And one had helped in the field testing with a newer John Deere combine that I had. And actually I contacted John Deere dealers north of Interstate 80 within about an 80-mile radius. Mm-hmm. Went and actually visited them, showed them the product, and got a quick lesson in talk is cheap. A lot of them said, yeah, I think I can sell a few of these. And I sold two through John Deere, one each through two John Deere dealers. And the rest...
Not an effective sales channel.
Yeah, the rest were some kind of a personal contact, or I think there was one that was... Lee Klein, the former ag reporter guy
on the radio.
On the radio, he interviewed me in the studio in Des Moines once, and I think I got at least one call from somebody that heard that and said, "Hey, I'm interested in that." So
okay,
and I helped most all of the farmers install the systems myself, and spent a lot of time out in the field with some of the farmers, seeing it operate and so on. So that's the very beginning. And in late 1992, I realized, it's tough, and but I'm going to have some employees, so I got to find a place. I got to rent someplace. So I actually rented a place that's over in a little office building along Airport Road that's only 100, 200 yards from here. Mm-hmm. And that was the start of Ag Leader in the very beginning.
So in that 6-year period, Al, of developing your product, what were some of the significant setbacks that you had to overcome? And I think about even testing. Now you could do some testing, presumably outside of harvest, but there's, for real testing, there's only one harvest per year.
Right. Yeah.
So did that affect kind of your ability?
Well, it certainly limited the speed and my resources, since I was doing everything other than this metal company. And the reason the sales guy at that company listened to me is he actually wanted to start his own company, and I actually helped him start his own company a few years later, and owned it 50% and sold it off to him when he was able to buy it out completely. But some help with that, and then some advice from the tech support guy at the company that made the single board computer I was using. I'd say the biggest challenges were solving some of the technical issues with obtaining the accuracy. Mm-hmm. And I would say I didn't have anybody but myself to really help me with that, because I was doing this undercover, and to make sure I could retain my full-time job to support my family. But I would say one advantage to my limited resources and time is, working a full-time 40 to 50 hour a week job and thinking about it in my off time, I had a lot of time to think about possible solutions. And then on weekends, holidays, vacation, and so on, then I would, spend my time designing or programming or, building, possible solutions to the technical issues to obtain accuracy. Those, wouldn't say they were setbacks, they were obstacles to overcome. And one thing that was very wise of me, and when I thought I wanted to start a business, I read a lot of books about starting a business, and there was one, I think it was called Competitive Strategy, and it was actually written for about large companies' businesses, because it talked about vertical integration versus horizontal integration, that kind of thing, which obviously was not relevant to me as intending to be a startup. But one thing that was relevant and I took to heart was barriers to entry. Obviously, a barrier to entry to, let's say you want to be a car manufacturer like Elon Musk, excuse me for misspeaking, is money. You got to have money to build factories or that kind of a thing. But another barrier to entry is knowing how to do something that nobody else can do. And so I intentionally picked what I knew or was very confident was going to be a tough task. And it turned out to be a tougher task than I expected. And I'm going to tell you, in maybe halfway through that third or fourth year, I was thinking about giving up on it, but I stuck with it, and that's fortunate. And I actually, in the configuration of the grain flow sensor, I had diverged and gone off on a bunch of dead ends. And actually, I think maybe the fifth year, I went back to my original concept, refined it a little bit, and that ended up being the production concept. So, yeah, it was a tough development. And I'm going to say, even though there are aftermarket and OEMs that have developed their own grain flow sensors, I don't think anybody has yet exceeded the performance. I think
All these
others
years
have
later.
come pretty darn close. But I don't think anybody has beat me on that yet. Of course, I did have some patents, but they're long expired now,
Sure.
so
Sure.
anybody could. But there is some trade secret stuff that nobody outside of Ag Leader knows.
So Al, you're a technical founder and an engineer.
Yes.
So you overcame a bunch of engineering challenges in developing that product, and we've sat in meetings together with entrepreneurs that have an early development product,
Yeah.
and we're looking at investing in it. And I always love to have you in the room because you ask good questions. And I think more importantly, disabuse the founders maybe of some of the timelines they have in mind and the level of difficulty and their optimism. And so I think of that as sort of an engineering mindset. I wanted to ask, do you think of it that way? And sort of what are the positive things from the engineering mindset? And are there some negative things as well as a founder? And sort of how, as you built the organization, you think about surrounding yourself with complementary talent?
Well, certainly the engineering mindset and my engineering background, working at a company that provided products that were going to be built into major manufacturers' machines and had to be properly functional and have high reliability, that gave me certainly an edge up on understanding, even though it's a completely different type of product. I needed to design a product that had high functionality and good reliability if it was going to be a successful product. I would say that my engineering background probably made me think that, okay, this new to the world thing, it's the better mousetrap, or you might say, everybody's going to rush to it.
The world will rush to my door.
But that doesn't happen. And certainly I learned through experience that anything really new to the world, to a market, there's a long adoption curve. There's a very small number of people that jump at it right away. The people that want to try anything new, the people that are willing to be on the bleeding edge of anything new, that kind of thing. But it does, at least in the ag market and in many markets, it takes 10 plus years in many cases for the mass market to really adopt it. some of the OEMs did make it standard on their combine fairly early, but a lot of farmers weren't really using them or using them to their potential until, boy, it was at least 10 years, maybe 15 before it was really mass adoption.
Yeah, I was going to ask when you felt like you could look out and say, this product has really made it.
Well, early on, Case Corporation was the first to work with me, and they wanted to be and were the first to offer it as a factory option on combines. And they made it standard a few years later. I don't remember, but by then it was pretty obvious that I had made it, and I had the other. My first competitor. It was an existing small privately owned company in conjunction with, I think, some farmers that worked with them. They sold their product after the first year because it was a disaster in the field as far as how it worked, to a large company that I feared could be a real competitor to me, that had been in business in the ag electronics industry for quite a few years. And they improved it some, but the performance of my product basically, won out over the competition. So I would say, well, it was only 4 years after I started the company that Case adopted this as a factory option. So there was a pretty fast, because of their business, it was a relatively fast adoption rate. But again, they were moving a lot of them into the market, but a lot of the farmers weren't really using them.
Okay.
Some weren't using them at all, wouldn't even turn them on.
I'm having a flashback. It was on a Case combine. I was writing with a customer of my company from back then, probably 2003 or 4 when I saw my first, would have been one of yours. And I knew of you. I hadn't met you at that point, but it was pretty.
It?
Oh, he was pretty addicted to it.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was pretty happy with the yields that he wanted to show off since I was a guest.
Right.
Yeah, it was above 200 bushels per acre.
Yeah,
so he was pretty happy about that. When you think, Al, about kind of engineering and product development and commercialization challenges, how do you think about failure as part of the process, and maybe not, or mistakes, I guess might be another way to put it. I was explaining before we started recording that I'm in a series of podcasts kind of inspired by the Wright brothers, who had a very hard engineering challenge more than 100 years ago, but they sort of learned by doing, certainly made a lot of mistakes. None of them, fortunately for them, were fatal, because that's what happened to some other people trying to develop airplanes back in the day. But how do you think about mistakes and ultimately getting closer and closer to success with a product?
Well, in developing a product, internally, I feel that we have a pretty good understanding of what has to be, through laboratory and field testing, what has to be done to make that product acceptable to the customer in terms of functionality and reliability. So, yes, in that engineering development, there's always, I don't know if mistakes seems kind of a harsh term for it, but yes, you design something based on your engineering knowledge and how you think it should be. Then you start testing, and these things don't work right.
Does it
so
come up
fix
to
those.
A standard or
right? And you put it in the field, and it doesn't. The farmer doesn't like the way it works. Often the user interface and the electronic devices, that kind of thing. So there's usually a 2-3 year progression before, in many cases, if it's something really new, to get it really right for the market. Now, I would say the big mistakes are, we have had a couple of products that we have developed, and functionally they would work and reliability was okay, but the market didn't accept them. In one case, it was our cotton yield monitor that actually Case Corporation wanted us to do that, so we did. And they allowed us, they put it on their cotton pickers quite a few years ago, maybe about 2000, and allowed us to sell aftermarket on both John Deere and Case cotton pickers, the two manufacturers. Well, cotton farmers didn't adopt it. Like Case, the guy who worked with us from Case he said, yeah, these farmers, it's a high value crop. These guys will go for that right away. And they didn't. And there was actually a big, what they call a Beltwide conference that would be held at different locations in the southern states every year, where university and company people, and there was companies, we displayed our monitor there for several years, would get together. And after a few years, there was actually some sessions by industry and university people saying, why aren't cotton farmers adopting precision farming? They have, so now, but basically John Deere did their own, and they've just about put Case out of the business, cotton picker business these days. So the product the market wasn't ready for the product, and nobody understood it at the time. And we had another product, which was a sensor that sensed the health of corn, an optical sensor that looked down at the corn. And you could variable rate nitrogen with it, which we had done a lot of field testing and proved that to ourselves that with actual full-scale farm tests, 90% of the time there was a payback from that. But for various reasons, farmers didn't want to do it because you needed to go through the crop when it was tall. They wanted to put it on with a side dress bar when the corn
was smaller,
6-8 inches tall.
Yeah.
And other things changed, and you had to use a high clearance sprayer to do it properly. And farmers today do variable rate nitrogen, but based on different techniques. So that one was a hit, because even though you could show the payback, most farmers didn't want to do it. They didn't want to run it. They didn't have or didn't want to run a high clearance sprayer through crop. And then, cropping practices and machinery practices changed. So it's become kind of I still think it's a good concept, but it's become irrelevant in terms of the market wanting it now.
Yeah.
So those are the big mistakes, where you spend millions of dollars on developing and trying to market a product, and it doesn't go anywhere.
Either market timing or just market acceptance is not there.
Yeah, I've told a lot of people, I was very fortunate that I had the right product at the right time. When I started developing the yield monitor, I did not even know of the existence of GPS. And even after I became aware of it, I have to admit, I had no idea where this precision farming thing was going to go. And the yield monitor was the right thing at the right time. And it was the first precision farming product to become widely accepted. Now, GPS steering became bigger because you could apply it to any self-propelled machine. Yield monitor was just for combines. But I had the right product at the right time. And if you have the right product at the wrong time, or the wrong product at any time, you're not going to be very successful.
Yeah, but those yield maps, a result of two technologies, the one that you had created and GPS, coming together at the same time. Well, on the Ag Leader website, Al, it notes that your business holds ethics, relationships, trust, and integrity highly.
Right.
And so I wanted to take note of that. How do those values show up in your business?
Well, let me use my cheat sheet here.
Sure.
This is not something we use publicly. I think we use it in private meetings with some of our dealers, and we use it here at Ag Leader. We have something on our internal website called Core Values of Ag Leader. And the 4 core values are excellence. Those are, and under these we've got a number of sub-points. I'll mention a few. Things like honor your commitments, make things right for the customer, see the job through all the way. Basically, do your job to the best of your ability. We try to create excellent products. we work really hard to do an excellent job of manufacturing quality products. I know we've got really high scores with some of the large OEMs like John Deere and C&H that we provided product to in terms of quality and delivery. So excellence is one of our 4 core values. Approachable, that means be open to new ideas, praise others, help others, be an active listener, seek to understand, accept criticism and feedback. And that's things like basically everyone at any level in the company should be approachable, and we should work together. We shouldn't build silos. I always hated company politics in the big company that I worked for. I saw it. I didn't participate in it. I knew I would never rise to a high position in a company like that. Because I didn't want to play that game.
So you don't want it played at your business either.
I knew managers that I worked for that felt other managers stabbed them in the back and things like that. So approachable means work well with others and so on. Then there's willing, ready, and doing, which relates to also how you work with others. Some of our subpoints are see a need, fill a need, willing to learn, volunteer rather than, what do we call it? There's a term some people, when you can't get a volunteer.
Voluntold.
Voluntold, maybe that's it. That kind of thing. And, one thing I remember, here, the term, that's not my job, is not going to be accepted. I'll tell you a little story from my very early days in engineering, probably only a couple years into my engineering career. The company bought a little company from up in Wisconsin and moved their manufacturing to Ames. And one engineer, they only got one employee, that company, who was an engineer, and he sat in the cube next to me. And he was really frustrated, and I can understand why, that this division that bought his company wasn't really putting an attention on his product. That's the kind of things that happen with big companies. Mm-hmm. Some vice president decides to buy this little company, think it'll fit well with the product, and you put it in this division, they don't care.
And it gets ignored.
But anyway, I can vividly remember one day somebody from out in the factory had a problem with manufacturing. There were hydraulic valves, and this guy was the only engineer that knew anything about them. So he got a call, and the main thing I remember is him saying, "That's not my job," and slamming the phone down. And it probably wasn't his job, but they didn't have any other resources to go out in the factory and help the guys in the factory. So, there's times you might be asked to do something that's not your job here, but what you should do is use the approachable value and find out, should there be a job, someone to do this job? But in a pinch, maybe you have to do a job that someone else should do or we don't have a position to do. Mm-hmm. And the final one is the courage to do what is right. And that's things like, if you said something you shouldn't have said, admit it, apologize. If you offended someone, apologize. But a big part of it is that involves money, is do what's right for the customer. The customer spent good money to buy your product, and if he's got a problem with it, you need to make it right. Often that involves money, like retrofitting. We don't call it recalls like the automotive industry, but that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. At the manufacturer's cost, make it right for the customer. And these ideas are certainly the excellence, willing, ready, doing, and courage to do what is right were very heavily my beliefs. It was another manager here who's one of my vice presidents who pushed the idea of approachable. I don't think he was pushing it because I wasn't approachable. I think we had some managers that maybe weren't as approachable as they should have been. That
Sure.
he wanted us to focus on that.
How do you bring those values to life with, in the organization, whether it's with new employees, maybe a
new
long-time
employees-
employee who violates one of those values in some way?
Well, new employees are, there is a new employee, what's the right term for it? Not indoctrination, but familiarizing new employees, like with HR policies, but they do see this, and it's just explained and some other things to them. So they probably, a lot of those employees, it doesn't mean a lot, particularly if you're just out of college and you don't understand the things you may
Don't
run
have any workplace comparisons
right.
to make.
Don't have any workplace experience yet, because it is different than college. For sure. And we show it sometimes. We've had large meetings. When we first initiated this, we had all the managers in their areas go through it, explain it, allow their subordinates in their area to ask questions. So we do focus on it. We have an internal webpage that has information that isn't public, like we have an employee directory that see their picture and phone number and email and that kind of thing. And this is on there. If you open up our a web browser, it defaults. The IT people set it up so it defaults to the homepage of this, and that's right there in front of you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm a connoisseur of what I say, what people have written on the wall, and maybe you don't have it written on the wall, but it's written on a page that shows up on people's computers.
Well, before that, we had the traditional vision and mission thing, and we haven't taken them down. But this has kind of replaced that.
Okay.
The vision and mission is for the visitors, really. Let's say some OEM customer that wants to possibly deal with us. That's good for them to look at. That kind of tells us, well, what's the company about in terms of what we do. Mm-hmm. And we do have some of that kind of stuff similar within this package of what is Ag Leader about. The other thing I will point out, I think in any company, of course, all managers need, and everybody needs to walk the talk. You need to exhibit. And I've always believed that the attitude of the employees comes down from the top. And so I do think that this reflects my values very strongly, and I think certainly the people that have been here a long time understand that's the way I work and the way I want them to work. So,
well, thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you, Al, for all you do.
You bet.